Today on Locked On Canadiens, I have two special guests telling me all about the future of the Montreal Canadiens defense. That's coming up in just one moment here on Locked On Canadiens.
You are Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi there, everyone, and welcome to episode 891. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. My name is Laura Sab, also known as the Active Stick, and I'm not joined, as always, by the wonderful Scott Matla. He is off this week, and instead I have a very densely packed conversation with two of my favorite public scouts, and that's all coming up all this week. I've got 3 episodes, and it's all prospect related. So without further ado, I'm going to start. On today's episode, what you're going to hear is all about Lane Hutson's progress. You're going to hear all about David Reinbacher's upside. We talked a lot about the downsides. We're going to talk about the upsides and where we can expect him to end up with the Montreal Canadiens. And then finally, we're going to talk about Adam Engstrom, who this year has really emerged as a promising defensive prospect. My guests are the wonderful Hadi, Kalakeche, and Sebastian, both of the Locked On NHL Prospects podcast, which you can find wherever you get this podcast, and you should be subscribed to because they've got so much insight. They're also from Dobber Prospects. Sebastian is the head of scouting as well as the director of European scouting for Dobber Prospects, and Hadi is the director of North American scouting for Dobber Prospects. Also, you will find their work literally everywhere. Hadi also writes for Habs Eyes on the Prize. And you can bet that I asked them a lot of questions and there was a lot of information. In fact, it was so much, like I said, I had to split it up. So the first segment, we're going to talk about Lane Hutson. So I'm here with Sebastian and Hadi Kalakeche of Locked On NHL Prospects, which you should really be listening to. Whether or not they're talking about Habs prospects, they know everything about everything. So really, you should be checking out their podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today, Hadi and Sebastian, to talk about, specifically today, we're going to be talking about Habs prospects.
Sure, that's our area of expertise. So let's get right into it.
It's going to be fun.
Let's go. All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is Lane Hutson, because we were hyped. Sebastian, you were with us from the beginning. We were hyped about this short king. And all he did this year was build upon that hype. He had a really successful year in the NCAA. So I want to talk a little bit about just how far he came within the span of 1 year and what we think his next step is going to be. Now, I think that it's going to be a little bit more time in the NCAA, but I would love your thoughts. Like, how have you seen his progression this year?
It's been awesome. He progressed more than I expected him to, and I had him ranked 11th overall. So he had a tremendous season, and I don't think anybody except maybe himself and his family expected him to be as good as he was immediately. Like I was expecting maybe a first couple months of him testing the water in the NCAA and getting used to the style of play, which is just completely different from the USHL. But he just thrived immediately, and that despite the fact that my biggest concerns in his draft year were his pivots, and they didn't progress too much in his D+1. And despite that, he came such a long way. He became a far more, I think, controlled offensive player. Of now, it's controlled chaos, whereas in the past it was perhaps a bit more
chaos.
Yeah, and spontaneous, and he adapted. It was kind of improvised often, despite his intelligence. But and he can do that because he processes the game so damn quickly that he can improvise and do just fine. But he added an element of control, and he started attacking the middle a lot more effectively and consistently. His shooting habits became incredible, and he's worked on his shot a lot as well. Like he's become a true dual threat from the blue line, which is rare for a D+1. So Lane Hutson progressed really well, and I enjoyed every second of it.
Yeah, fully agreed. I mean, there's also the element of, we didn't see much progression in his, like Sebastian mentioned, his pivots, his skating abilities in general. But I feel like he got a lot more intelligent and composed defensively. He's not kind of jumping the gun every chance that he gets. He's still getting beat wide just because his skating can't keep up with his brain. But in situations where he doesn't need to go at full speed, where he has the time to react, to think about what the next opposing move will be, he's gotten a lot better at anticipating moves, at getting into lanes preemptively and kind of stopping chances from occurring before they kind of materialize. So that's one thing I've seen as an improvement in Hudson's game. But yeah, the controlled element is both more present in his offensive game and more present in his defensive game, which is what you want out of Hutson at this level. I mean, he still has ways to go. I think at minimum a full year in the NCAA next year would benefit him. Maybe one more just to iron out his skating deficiencies and his defensive game even more. But I mean, you're talking about a guy who didn't need to improve his offensive game and still did. So it's amazing. And when's the last time a defenseman led his conference in scoring in his freshman year? I mean, that's just absurd. It's just ridiculous.
It's dumb. And just to add one last thing, I think I'm of the mind of one more year in the NCAA for Hutson and then 1 year in Laval. I think having a more linear progression in terms of levels would be really good for him in terms of not going NCAA to NHL. I think 1 year in the AHL would do him a ton of good. Yeah. But I'm curious to see what the Habs do with that, because even this current regime has shown a tendency to get players from wherever they're at and immediately stick them into the NHL. And I don't think that would be the best strategy for Lane Hutson.
So I do want to, just before we move on to another prospect, talk a little bit about that aspect of it, because I think one of the things with Canadiens fans is that when we see talent, we get impatient. I think it's like that with every fan base, but in Montreal, I think we're so starved for, a good, reliably strong contending team year in and year out, that when we see somebody who has this kind of upside, and we see, like, Hadi, like every single week you would have something about a new record he broke or a new thing he did, or how many points he had per night. Like I literally would remember that, and on Sundays when we would start to record, I would go back and look at your Twitter feed to see like what you had said about Lane Hutson, in case I missed any of his games, or in case, because like obviously he is one of my favorite prospects, so I kept a little bit more of a closer eye. But my question is, so I think patience needs to be the name of the game with players like this, because the talent is there, and we know the talent is there, but it needs to be translatable to a professional league, which is so important. And I think a lot of people are still concerned about his size. I'm not necessarily concerned about his size. I would say what aspects of his, like the fine tuning, what aspects of his game needs some more fine tuning. I mean, you both mentioned probably at least another year in the NCAA. I do think, though, that if he has a full year and there's a chance to bring him to Laval, like the Habs will probably take that opportunity. I think we'll learn a lot this year about what they do with who they put in Laval and who they don't. So what kind of what kind of aspects of his game do you think require a little bit finer tuning before he can move to a professional league with potentially bigger bodies, a little bit more bruising, a little bit more, a little bit more professional? Like in the NHL, he's going to be playing with the top players, right?
Yeah, hopefully. And the thing is with Hutson is that everything mental in his game, he's got down pat. I don't think there's much to kind of develop there. It's just his feet don't keep up with his brain, and that's a big concern right now. For a smaller guy, you need to be able to evade pressure. You need to be able to keep up with wingers when they're barreling down the sides of the ice. I mean, if you put him up against Josh Anderson in a 1v1 rush defending scenario, he's losing every time. It's just, he needs to work on that pivoting game. And, as soon as he faces someone big enough or fast enough or strong enough with a decent enough reach off the rush, he gets beat fairly easily. And we saw that at the World Juniors and at the International World Championships, which was, that was kind of his introduction to playing against men, against professionals, against guys who, have a chance in the NHL. And you saw a difference. I mean, he scored a fantastic goal, probably the best goal we saw in the tournament. But then defensively in that same game was getting beat regularly. So it's just, how much do you mitigate that risk, and how high can he play in the lineup really depends on improving his skating, improving his pivoting, and just improving overall his ability to keep up with players off the rush. That's his biggest, I think, area of weakness that needs fine tuning. And I think as soon as you work on making him more explosive out of pivots, making him access his outside edges a bit better, you're getting a player who's going to be able to keep up mentally with the game, because he already does. You just need to get that physical aspect up, not in terms of strength, because I don't think Hudson's ever going to bully a 6'3" winger. It's just not his game. But he's able to play between checks. He's able to find options under pressure a lot better than he did last year as well. For me, it's just mainly off the rush, because in his own zone, when he's recovering a puck, he's able to absorb a hit, absorb pressure, and play through it. It's just off the rush is the biggest concern. And as a defenseman who's so offensively inclined, as daring as he is, he's going to be facing a lot of rush scenarios. So the more you mitigate that risk, the better Hutson will be, and the higher the chance of him becoming a true top pair defenseman.
I want to preempt something real quick. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole because we could talk about this for hours. I want to preempt the whole size argument with Lane Hutson. I think one of the things is that people will say, like, oh, the reason that he can't do that is because he's not big enough. But I want to go back to what you're talking about, like he's never going to bully a 6'3" winger. That's okay if you have other guys, right? Like, it's not about, like, people are always like, enough with these small players. I think it's all about balance. Like, you do need a bigger bruising guy. And for me, I don't care about size as much as, I care about talent. So if you're going to get a big guy, don't just get a guy that's just large, right? Or heavy or plays heavy. That person needs to have skill. And I think if you have a balance up and down your lineup of that, it's okay for Lane Hutson not to be able to do that, right? Like, his strength is somewhere else. It's not there. And you have to, if you're managing a team, if you're constructing a roster, you have to play to each other's strengths and sort of make sure that you have balance up and down your lineup. Because I get so sick of being like, the Canadiens only pick small players. That is absolutely not true. That is definitely not something that's going on. But also that you only need big players to win. I think you absolutely need skill. And I think that should be where you start, and then you build in the size wherever possible. I think that's just my point of view. It's just because I'm like imagining everybody complaining about his size, and I'm like, that's not what he's here for. He's not here to be big. He's here to be talented. He's here to create offense. He's here to kind of, he's here to help the transition game. He's here to get the puck out of the zone. He's here to create chances. I think that's the most important thing with Lane Hutson.
For sure. I mean, look, if you're looking back at the Kalakeche draft, how many Habs fans right now would be saying that they'd rather have the big Finnish centerman instead of the small American defenseman in Quinn Hughes? Not many.
Yeah. Exactly. Right? So, like, you kind of have to have balance. In just one moment, you're going to hear me ask about David Reinbacher, and we're going to be talking all about his ceiling, his upside. It's all good vibes about David Reinbacher on today's episode. And once you hear what they have to say, you're going to feel really good about this pick. That's all coming up in just one moment. But first, I have to tell you about AG1. I started taking AG1 daily because I needed to take charge of my health. It is the daily foundational nutrition supplement that supports whole body health, and I drink it literally every day. It is delicious. I was exhausted. I'm stressed out. My life is extremely full and extremely stressful, so I started taking AG1. I drink AG1 in the morning before I start my long days, and it truly makes me feel ready to tackle my day, ready to tackle my stress. It gives me that energy that I need. And if you want the same thing, you want to take care of yourself and you want that energy, that clarity, what you want to, you want to be ready to start your days, you want to drink AG1 just like I do. And if a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D, as well as 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL network. Check it out. Speaking of balance, the Canadiens this year did kind of go in a different direction with all of their draft picks. I did want to focus a little bit on David Reinbacher because I think that some of the positivity and upside in his game has been lost in sort of the collective fan disappointment or underwhelm with the draft. So I wanted to really have a conversation about David Reinbacher and talk about what does he bring to the game? Like, what are we excited about with David Reinbacher?
My comp for him all season long was Caden Gooley, and I kind of stick by that. There are definitely differences. Gooley, as a draft eligible, was definitely more violent than Reinbacher is. Not to say that Reinbacher doesn't play with physicality. He does. It's just Gooley will explode people in hits, right? And that's not really Reinbacher's game. He doesn't really chase hits very much, which Gooley doesn't do too much, but less so. The one key difference that I see between the two is that on the one hand, I think Reinbacher is a little bit more refined than Goulet was in his draft year. And on the other hand, where Goulet was a strong handler and carrier, but a bad passer, Reinbacher is the opposite. He is a very strong passer, and his handling skill is very limiting. He kind of has a locked top hand with his elbow over his shoulder. Is kind of an awkward stance, and that limits his range of motion a lot. So when he's kind of circling around the offensive zone or trying to go through the neutral zone, carry the puck up himself, he's really only relying on his feet and his physicality to protect the puck and to evade. There's very, very little like deception in his rushes, and I think that's something that he'll need to work on. That said, this is a really intelligent defensive player, very, very, very good both in zone and in defending the rush. He plays extremely well in a professional system in the Swiss Hockey League. I think his defensive game is among the most refined of the entire 2023 draft class. That said, in the offensive zone, I think he's more limited than the point totals might suggest. Like, we've seen NHL models like adore him for his production in a professional league. I'm a little bit more skeptical on that based on how he produced. A lot of it was secondary assists, shots from the point that were deflected. His big flashes of offense were often him like circling around the offensive zone and like where the ice surface is bigger in Europe. And he just kind of goes around once or twice in a circle and doesn't prod any holes in that compact defensive structure, just kind of goes around and then passes off to a teammate still on the perimeter. So I think he needs to really integrate some elements of deception and, for instance, like maybe using some stutter steps in those circles, trying to poke holes, and rather than just going single speed in a little circle. But those are things that he can develop. I think with the Habs development team, there's definitely hope that he can really build on his offensive game. But I think as of right now, it's a little bit limited. But yeah, I think he's an excellent player, and the Habs are lucky to add him to their prospect pool. I don't quite think it was the highest value selection at 5, which I think a lot of Habs fans also feel. But that said, this is going to be a top 4 piece for the next 2 decades for the Habs. I think he fits systemically really, really well. Like, he's going to be a great fit with Martin St. Louis. And he won't have the offensive burden either. Like Lane Hutson can be the first power play quarterback. Yep. You don't need Reinbacher to be that player, and that's okay. He can thrive in a different role. He's going to be a tremendous 5-on-5 defenseman, and probably a really solid PK one as well. So you're getting a really good player, but perhaps a little bit more subtly good than you would expect to get at 5th overall.
Yeah, and one thing I'd add regarding NHLE is I like NHLE models in kind of a rudimentary aspect of, in late rounds, sure, bet on the guy with the top 20 NHLE. You never know. But for me, it's just the thing with NHLE that isn't considered is how certain, league structures benefit certain play styles and skill sets. And that's definitely the case for Reinbacher, where he was able to put up all those points because a lot of the structures in the Swiss National League are collapsing structures defensively. So you'll see a lot of protecting the slot, a lot of 5-man within the high slot type scenarios. And that benefits Reinbacher's game greatly because he's a poor handler. So he's never going to he doesn't have to go to this high slot because it's always clonked up. So all he needs to do is use his strong skating, his physical reach in order to circle the ice, like Sebastian said. So that's kind of the one limiting aspect of NHLE is that it often purely looks at point production, sometimes size, sometimes handedness within a certain league to kind of equivocate that to what it would be in the NHL. But it severely understates the aspect of why does this player succeed in that league as well. Would that player succeed in the SHL or the KHL or that kind of thing? It doesn't take that into consideration. All it does is equivocate the points using an equation, which has its benefits. Like I said, when you're drafting in the mid to late rounds, you're looking for those gems. Always bet on the guys that are able to produce more than their age group, for sure. But to look at a guy at 5th overall to go, yeah, his NHLE's high and kind of limited to that, it's just there's a lot more that goes into it, and that's the scouting aspect.
Especially when there was a player with an even better NHLE left on the board.
Are we talking about Zach Benson or Matvei Michkov? Because both
Either
are,
or.
yeah. So,
I honestly, for me, Zach Benson was the one where I was like really fixated on, and I was
mhm.
disappointed. I want to stay on David Reinbacher for just one more moment because he did sign his entry level deal, obviously this summer, which in my mind gives the Canadians a lot more control over his development.
For
So
sure.
if you're the Canadians and you're the skills coach and you're kind of any of the development team, like what kinds of things are you having David Reinbacher work on over the next couple of years?
Oh, small ice scenarios for sure with the puck. Just evading pressure quickly, getting on his backhand, and just cutting across opponents' hands in order to get out of small ice scenarios would be his big weakness because he hasn't faced many of those scenarios in the Swiss National League. The even the forechecking pressure is completely different than what he's going to be facing in North America. There's at most one guy who's pressuring you, and he's even pressuring you very lightly, usually in the Swiss National League. Whereas in the AHL, in the NHL, you often see 2-1-2s on the forecheck. You often see kind of scenarios where you try to evade one guy, the second guy's on your back, that kind of thing. He's gonna have to work on those. So definitely, on puck scenarios where he's having to recover pucks off the boards, get off of them quickly, get on his backhand and cut across pressure rather than trying to just poke pucks up the boards, that kind of thing would very, very benefit his game. Yeah.
His off puck game is very, very strong. It's one of the stronger ones in the entire 2023 draft class. So as Hadi said, like it is the on puck game, and I think I would build on like same type of thing, but specifically the handling. I think he really needs to loosen up that top hand. He needs to, I think, just stick him with Marie-Philippe Poulin for a couple months and work on the handling and work on the puck protection, the small area game, which is one of her greatest strengths. I think that would be great. That'd be one of my big focuses. Obviously, keep trying to develop his strengths further. I think if he's going to be a top pairing player in the NHL, it's if you double down on his current strengths. Like you're not going to get into a top pairing role by trying to make him an offensive wizard. Like it's not going to happen. That's totally fine. But I would keep trying to develop the defense, keep developing the physicality, keep developing everything that he's good at. Because I think you need to get those to the level of being separating skills in order to unlock that top pairing potential too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One last little thing I'd say is just the kind of recovering rims off the boards in the offensive zone would be one thing. It'll really help his handling to be able to face those scenarios more often where he's collecting pucks off the boards in the offensive zone. Basically, you rim the puck around the offensive zone, have him on the right side of the offensive blue line, recovers the puck, has to go to his backhand. Basically, you give him a forechecker that's pressuring him up the board so that he has to go to the inside. It'll develop small habits that are really good because off the puck, even offensively, he's really good. His ability to read when to pinch, when to hit the offensive zone, when to hit those pockets is really good, and that's going to pair really well with Lane Hutson. But it is essential to me that he learns to do the work that Hutson does on the puck in the offensive zone. That'll be really good for his game.
This is so much information. I'm smiling just because I'm learning so much right now. As you guys know, prospects are not my strong suit. My strong suit is whining about the Habs power play. But we are not whining at all today. Like it's basically a very positive show today. Up next, we're going to talk about Adam Engstrom and his emergence as a true promising defensive prospect for the Montreal Canadiens. And that's all coming up next. I want to turn our attention to another positive aspect of the Canadiens is Adam Engstrom. So when he was drafted, obviously there wasn't a whole lot of information that Habs fans were familiar with. Like Adam Engstrom was not somebody that we were closely studying or following. I think part of it has to do with we didn't know how this new organization front office would draft, like what their philosophy was. And I think over the course of the last year, I think what he's done is kind of, in my mind, whether it was progress this year or it's something that he had all along that we weren't noticing, is that he is so much more promising than what we thought and also so much more promising than where he was drafted. I think that's also really key. So I wanted to ask you guys a little bit about your thoughts, and let's say you're not super familiar with Adam Engstrom. Why should Canadiens fans be hype about him?
Yeah, so I've watched a whole lot of Engstrom, and especially last year. And what I've always come across, and what a lot of his coaches were saying was he needs to learn to play poker. basically how when to fold, when to go all in, especially defensively. He would often go all in. He would often pressure guys really hard, and kind of get left on the back foot heading into his own zone, that kind of thing. He's very good in transition. He's got a great first pass, fantastic hands. He's able to get out of pressure really well. Some of the things that we were talking with Reinbacher that are kind of missing, he has down pat. But the defensive game, like I said, playing poker, learning how to read the game and when to kind of get involved defensively, when to hold back, when to hold the blue line, that kind of thing, is really going to help his game. And I feel like that's come a long way. Watching him in this training camp, I felt like he was a lot closer to the NHL than he was previously, that was my main concern. Is with Engstrom, I saw kind of a longer path to the NHL where it would take him 3-4 years. Now I'm talking maybe a year or two before, I feel like he's NHL ready in terms of development. So the progression in his defensive game, the progression in his activation and his kind of composure defensively has gone a long way. So I'm really, really impressed with Engstrom.
Yeah, I've gone back and actually watched some draft year footage with the context of the D+1 year, because I remember watching him like while scouting the 2022 class, and I was always like, he was okay. Like he was often quite passive on the ice, and I think the big difference, as Hadi kind of alluded to, is that as a D+1, he started going all in every single time. And in his draft year, he was way too passive. So in my mind, it was kind of an overcorrection, like for the offense, which you kind of want to see as a D+1. Like I'd rather see a player try to overcorrect and then have to like recalibrate, because it means that they have that range. And once you have that range, I think it's a bit easier to try to fall somewhere in the middle where you find a bit of a more effective style. But yeah, he was incredible in my viewings. The D+1, he was one of the best U21 defensemen in Sweden for sure, and he was doing that as a 19-year-old who was a third-round draft pick. It was really impressive. He's extremely mobile. He flashes really impressive skill. He's not like Lane Hutson in terms of taking over shifts in the offensive zone, but he makes really good, subtle offensive plays, and he will be aggressive offensively. I think right now my projection would be an offensive player on a second pairing. I think that is quite a reasonable one. I haven't quite seen the top pairing upside in terms of like the raw skill, like even in his most aggressive all-in moments, it's not an overwhelming skill, even against junior competition. So I think if fans are starting to get hyped in terms of like he is our future top pairing guy, I would pump the brakes a little bit, but I think he's excellent, and I don't think he's getting quite enough focus by the collective Habs fan base, though I have seen some individual people go be very optimistic on his potential too.
And I think part of it is also just because of where he was drafted, right? Like everybody has a tendency to just kind of look at the top players or the ones in North America, just kind of, as we get more news about the QMJHL players,
more
the
highlights
OHL
too.
players. Yeah, like this, it's more available to us. What I'm hearing a little bit is that these are aspects of his game that he can improve by playing a maximum number of minutes against the best competition, essentially, right?
Yeah,
and
he
will be doing that this year. He's going to be a first pairing defenseman in the SHL as a D+2, and it's going to be nuts. Like he's in a great system. Regla is is probably the best development program in all of Europe. Probably, yeah. Like it's a tremendous place for him to marinate. I'd probably give him 2 more years there, just because it's such an awesome role. I would rather not like try to tear him out of that in a year's time. Like I'd rather give him 2 years as a top pairing guy in Sweden on a good young team, and like the doors kind of opened up for him. Like you have like William Wallinder, who's off to the AHL, which really opens up that top pairing left shot defenseman role. And he kind of had his and Willander as a right shot is also gone. But I think that the playoffs were really kind of like his coming out party as a true high-end SHL defenseman. Like you had interviews of the coaches, of the head coach that he was playing against in the middle of the series, saying like, yeah, this guy's ridiculous. Like I've had to like adapt my systems to deal with him. Like he's really skilled.
the opposing coach straight up said that he had no solution to Adam
Yeah,
Engstrom,
it's
which is
insane.
just
And this is in the SHL playoffs, and this is a 19-year-old kid. So
yeah.
his progression has been really, really impressive. I'm very curious to see how he starts the season in that big role, because last year was kind of the year where he elevated himself to that level. I'm curious what happens when he's kind of handed the keys to that defensive core as a 19-year-old. So it's going to be a very exciting season for Adam Engstrom, and I'm quite hopeful for his NHL upside.
Yep.
I think for me, his NHL upside is Habs have depth, right? Like that's something that they've lacked for like decades now. And so, you know, he's not going to make the top pairing. That's fine. Like if you have, like if your second and third pairing are also like high quality for that position, then you're sitting pretty, right? Like I'm not saying take a number one defenseman and like shoehorn him into number two or number four or number three, whatever it is, right? I'm just saying the Canadiens need like very strong, high quality depth if they're going to quote unquote contend. Like that's what everybody's aiming for. It's really about having the best players at each individual position and having them come together. All right. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode and you got a lot out of it, because there's tons more where that came from. On the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about Philip Machar. We're going to talk about some other prospects. We are going to talk about who Hadi and Sebastian are excited about for the next upcoming draft. Yes, we're already looking ahead to next year. And on Friday, it is an all prospect mailbag. It is all your questions. So make sure you are tuned in. You're subscribed to Locked On Canadiens wherever you get your podcasts, or on YouTube, or both. You can find us on Twitter at LO_Canadiens. You can find us on YouTube and leave mailback questions in those comments. You can also email us, lockedoncanadiens@gmail.com. We love to hear from you. You'll find me on Twitter at The Active Stick. You'll find Scott at Scott Matla. You'll find Hadi at HadiK_Scouting. You'll find Sebastian at High_Sebastian. And you will find their work at Dobber Prospects, Habs Eyes on the Prize, literally everywhere. They've got such great insight. I really hope you enjoyed today's episode, because that's what we're going to be doing on tomorrow's episode as well.